My name is Faris Kariuki. I'm the founder and CEO at Pure Infrastructure. The Pure Infrastructure podcast is in collaboration with DX5 and is sponsored by VMware. We are glad to have as our first guest for the second season, Lorna Hardie, who's the Senior Director for Sub-Saharan Africa at VMware. Welcome, Lorna.
Thank you so much.
We've been meaning to have a conversation with VMware on their strategy in Africa, why they sponsored our podcast, what their plans are for this region, and also to get to know the members of the team better. And so we'd just like to get a background on Lorna. Tell us more about yourself. How did you get into technology, and how did you end up at VMware?
Wow, that's a very long journey, which started just the other day. So the irony is the last thing I ever thought I'd be in was technology. I grew up in Scotland. My mother was in South Africa, and she ran a small reseller business. So my birthright into technology was being fetched off an aeroplane at the gracious age of 19 years old, being taken straight out to a place called Chamdor in South Africa and laying cable until 2 o'clock in the morning. So that was my birthright.
Wow.
I then helped her, and we ended up building PCs in the middle of the lounge. And, my exposure was just then, here's a CD, learn this software. You've got to talk to my client about it on Monday. So it was really thrown in at the deep end. And then by nature, I kind of fell into the distribution business and eventually started working for Hewlett-Packard in 1999. Which I fondly mentioned today in the event. 1999 was my first trip to Kenya, my very first presentation, actually, to the corporate domain. I was running the imaging and printing business at that stage. My career within HP evolved over that 15-year cycle. I spent time, as I said, running the imaging and printing business. I spent some time running the channel business. I then went on to run what was termed the Procove networking business for close to 7 years. And it went on to become the networking business, HP Networking. And my final stint within HP, and the reason I'm telling you this is because I kind of feel like it was the perfect storm, was to run the software business. I started off in the security domain, and then I went on to run the full, previous Mercury domain and effectively the application lifecycle management side. So it was the ops, the ALM, and the security portfolio. So it sort of gave me very broad exposure to the software business, and a great birthright into the industry, coming from a very strong infrastructure background. So when the opportunity came up with VMware, I felt like it was the perfect storm. Here I was coming from the very strong IT operations side of things, having touched in the application lifecycle management side and the security portfolio, and guess where VMware were going?
Yeah, perfectly covered both your history and...
Why VMware?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's very unusual to find, nowadays at least, people who've grown up building PCs, because it's a tradition that sort of just, it's been forgotten.
Yes.
Because now almost everyone who's starting out gets a laptop. But back then you sort of had to build your own device.
We had to cable tie, make sure it was all neat and tidy.
Yes.
And we built them up in the machines. We had to test them all, boot them up. It was great. A great experience.
And so just a deeper dive into the VMware decision. I know it ties in perfectly with your background. You'd worked in software, you'd worked in networking and in infrastructure, and sort of here comes this company that's sort of building software that allows you to manage that better. So in terms of skills, it was like a natural progression. But you've been there a while. Why have you remained with VMware for so long, and what do you see in the firm?
I've been there for 4.5 years, actually over 4.5 years, and it's been an incredible journey.
Yeah.
VMware, not only the technology drew me to the business as well as where I was in terms of experiences, but also the ethos, the team, and the spirit of the organization as it stands, and the epic values we all abide by inside the organization was a tremendous draw card. Why am I still there? Because I love it. Yeah. I love what I do. I love my team. I'm very passionate about the technology. There is not one day that goes by without something new coming to the table. If you look at VMware, it's a constant evolution. Yeah. The acquisition of the companies as they've gone by. It's been quite incredible over the last few years. It's really kept my team, myself, my customers, our partners, our are the full quorum in terms of, our engagement on our toes, right?
Yeah.
So it's far from boring.
Yeah. And what exactly do you do? Like, what's your day job at VMware? Like, what does that entail?
Chief
Nuts and
cook,
bolts.
bottle washer, HR. Where would you like me to start?
Bottle washer.
So, oh gosh, what am I? I guess as the regional director, it's been an evolving role as our organisation has matured. As the team has matured and grown, my role has also evolved and grown. So. My really, I guess I'm the interface between my team and the broader VMware organization in many ways, but I'm also the interface between the public and VMware. So it's a great representative role. At the same time, it's very much about making the key decisions, steering the business in the right direction, identifying where there are opportunities or potential areas where we need to tweak to make the business stronger. And I guess a lot of my role is really about listening, gathering feedback, interpreting that data, and implementing what I believe with my management team and the broader team is the right thing for both our regions, because it's obviously very dependent on our region, which differs, and understanding how to execute that and make it happen.
Yeah. And when you're speaking about the region, something that I find that many people are not very cognizant of when you're talking about Africa is you've got multiple languages. Like you have some people in Africa whose first language is Portuguese, French, English. In South Africa, it's Afrikaans, which is a variety of and you've got all these cultures. And in Africa, you actually have, at any one stage, if the northern hemisphere is in winter, we're in winter, or the southern hemisphere is in summer, like we cut across both ends. How do you manage people of different cultural and even geographic backgrounds? Because, in South Africa, it'll be cold. In the northern part, it's freaking hot.
So I think let's start with the region that I manage. So specifically, we span from west to east, incorporating South Africa, which is circa 32 countries. And again, yes, as you say, geopolitically very different, culturally very different. The weather conditions, as you say, very different. Just electricity-wise, very different. The availability of power, very different. A very hot topic at the moment, as I'm sure you're aware of. And I think at the end of the day is it's all about diversity, right? So what makes great chemistry when it comes to a good management team is diversity of opinion, diversity of faith, diversity of culture, diversity. So we have a very diverse team. We have offices in Nigeria. We have offices in Kenya, we have offices in Cape Town, and we have offices in Johannesburg. And that by no means is representative of the full geographical mapping, but we have specialists in each area. We have an East African team specifically focused on East Africa, West for West, South for South, and SADC for rest of Africa, which incorporates the likes of Angola and Mozambique, where it's predominantly, there's a tremendous amount of Portuguese influence, and Mauritius, the French element. So, and we draw on resources to support that, both from a language standpoint and a translatability standpoint, but also I draw on my team, my management team draws on the team. The specialist teams draw on the broader team in order to gather the influences and the data that impact the daily lives of those regions independently, understanding they're all very different.
And sort of to move it along, and it's sort of tied to what you've just said, we're in a very complicated region. Why do you think VMware is important, both like globally in terms of cloud infrastructure and more particularly in terms of addressing the needs that the continent has?
And I'd hate to use a paintbrush, but I do need to, in some ways, need to apply a degree of generalization to the conversation. So kind of Africa, as a general rule, tends to be slightly behind. But when it enters the market of the newer technologies, it does a jump start, right? Because by nature, we're innovative, curious individuals, right? And effectively, that means in many ways there tends to be a lag, but an opportunity to review what's happening in the rest of the world before our customers plunge. And so as a general rule, we find that potentially we may be behind the curve in terms of adopting technology, but often it's because we've been learning in many ways from what the other countries have been through in advance, and that applies to structure, it applies to infrastructure, and it applies to everything. Now, VMware, I believe, is perfectly positioned to assist our customers as they do the leapfrog into not only cloud, right, but really hybrid cloud and leveraging from which cloud is the right cloud for the different applications. And because of the innovative nature of our region and traditionally reaching regions and environments that have been unavailable because of infrastructural problems and effectively just rural areas just not having access to fundamental basics, VMware really has been working with partners across the landscape to facilitate how we can take that technology and that digital frontier closer to the edge and closer to those individuals in those regions. So it poses as a tremendous opportunity for both VMware, but also Africa as a whole in order to adopt newer technologies and take advantage of these apps.
What are your thoughts on the future now, like looking at where Africa is? You've been working on the continent for the last 22 or so years, actually more.
You can't do the maths.
So what are your thoughts on the future? Like, where do you see Africa in another 10 years, just from the trends that you're seeing across the continent?
There's no question. I mean, the tremendous opportunity in our continent is incredible. If you look at the youth, if you look at the demographics, if you look at the population, and where newer technology is being adopted in terms of the younger generation, Africa is a tremendous opportunity for not only VMware but businesses as a whole. Graham referred in his presentation today to the potential. I think it was 2.2 billion potential opportunity in the AI space for Kenya alone. So there was a 4.1 billion market by 2026, I believe, in the IoT space. So I mean, the opportunity is there. It's just how we get the fundamental basics right. From an infrastructure standpoint, from a bandwidth standpoint, from an access to power standpoint, I have to raise that from a let's enable the technology with the basics of what needs to be there in order to provide for that technology to take advantage of this.
Given your experience, what feedback do you have for CIOs trying to transform their organizations in this part of the world? Like, what should they pay attention to, and what risks should they be looking to ameliorate?
So the first would be pay attention to complexity and inviting complexity in. I think that there's a tremendous amount of technology out there and all incredibly powerful. But when one starts to combine them and manage the complexity of integration, then you have to be aware of what you're bringing upon your organization and what's going to keep you up at night, both from a management standpoint, a security standpoint, and a visibility standpoint. So that's definitely the first. The second is ask. Ask your colleagues, ask VMware, ask your counterparts for experiences, ask to speak to other customers out there, that is available to you to talk to you in terms of where you are in your journey and where you want to be. And maybe there's several phases to get to where you want to be in terms of the end point. But remember that there's a community out there to support you, and it's incredibly important to reflect and look out for that information and seek guidance.
On a bit of a tangential path, and sort of ties into your background, one of the things that people keep commenting on is gender equity. VMware has done a fantastic job of that. Like, I think most of the team in Sub-Saharan Africa it's very well balanced.
Yes.
But you sort of grew up in tech from the very early stages. What are your views on what can be done to sort of bridge the gender gap in tech?
So I can answer that. Today is not what I experienced in early 2000s in terms of gender equality, and in tech specifically. We're dealing with a very different market now, and it's wonderful to see. There's more recognition in terms of what diversity brings to the table, and effectively how a well-balanced organization and team really does tend to deliver stronger results across the board. And I think there's a common understanding in terms of that. How do we bring up the next generation has to be the most important point. And there are some incredible young talents that are coming into the industry, or not even in the industry today, that fear that they they couldn't enter this industry, that really we should be looking out as executives across the board, not only female executives, but across the board, at how we bring them in and start bringing them into the fold and understanding what the opportunity is for them to develop and become senior inside this industry, because it's a tremendously exciting, dynamic industry. And there's so many entry points and so many, from coding to graphics to development to, sales to marketing to, you name it, that's available. And really the onus is on us to provide those opportunities, look out for key talents, understand they may not come from an IT background, but they could, like I did, fall into the IT space unknowingly because they have a natural passion or inquisitiveness that really talks towards, growing in this tech business.
So fantastic answer, because it's one of the things that I found that is interesting is that the entry points vary for many people. My entry point was, the traditional tinkering about, but I actually found that there are other people who come in through storytelling and all this other, and then fall in love with the technology itself. And finally, what does the future hold for you individually?
Oh, my goodness, that's a difficult question to answer. I really love what I do, as I said, and I would love to continue to grow and remain passionate. I'm very passionate about Africa. I'd like to see the evolution of our business and as it evolves to become more specialized. So more specialized in terms of East Africa, West Africa, SADC, and South Africa. I envisage that as the short-term, let's call it, plan for VMware Sub-Saharan Africa. And the future for me, well, who knows?
Thank you so much, Lorna.
Thank you, Ferris. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it was great speaking to you.
You too.